Hey, what's up, y'all? You got Shiva here, and I want to give you guys some tips on how to run a test-to-learn experimentation program. So a little bit about me, I'm Shiva. I'm a senior strategist over at Spiro. I've been running CRO programs for about 6+ years across both B2B and B2C programs, and I make a lot of CRO memes to open conversations about experimentation. So if you guys are looking for your CRO meme fix, go ahead and follow me on LinkedIn. Got some good stuff there. So let's start with a quick framing exercise. As you can clearly tell behind me, I'm a huge hockey fan. So I wanted to kind of use hockey as a way to do a quick framing exercise for why we want to do test to learn. Hockey involves a number of things, especially learning to play hockey. One of them is going to be kind of skating, stick work, right? You're on a surface of ice, and you have these metal blades. How the hell do you move on ice like that? So there's obviously some skill involved in that, and passing stuff like that. So there's that baseline of knowledge. There's obviously big things like kind of these big boom hits to really get the crowd kind of into the games. They're shooting, right? You're not going to win a game if you can't literally put the puck in the net. And obviously, most importantly, is your celly, making sure you're celebrating properly. Otherwise, what's the point of playing hockey, right? Um, so why did I talk about these things? You have to learn how to get better with each of these skills. And probably a bunch of others. I've super simplified it. But you basically want to get really good at these types of skills because otherwise, it'll be opening night and you will literally fall flat on your face as they introduce you in front of 18,000 fans. This is something that actually happened. I did not make this up. So, why did I talk about this stuff? Well, what is your goal when it comes to experimentation and optimization? In the previous example with the framing exercise, is your goal to make it to the NHL? Probably not. It's probably more to become a good hockey player so that you can make it to the NHL. Your point isn't to just make it to the NHL by any means. It's to become a good enough hockey player that you make it to the NHL. And that's where I want to use that framing exercise to pull it back into CRO. It, Optimization and running a test to learn program isn't simply just about winning. It's about running these types of learning tests so that you win. So that's kind of the segue into what I want to talk about, maximizing your experimentation efforts by running a test to learn program. Okay, so let's go through the agenda real quick. We'll talk about why we test to learn. We'll talk about very quickly about writing hypotheses. We'll talk about setting yourself up for success within a test to learn program, and we'll go through a couple example tests. So why do we test to learn? So what? I mean, I just want money, right? Who cares about learning? I just want to win. Well, no. Thomas Edison had a very famous quote: I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. And I really like this quote. I think it's very powerful because I think it talks about CRO and experimentation in the right way. You're learning, and whether it loses and drops revenue in a particular way, that's fine because you just learned something that potentially isn't going to work for your audience, and that's okay. I think this is powerful and core to experimentation. So what exactly does test to learn mean to me? For me, it means focusing on hypotheses. It means focusing on proving these hypotheses right or wrong, and less of a fixation on short-term revenue goals. So that's not to say revenue is entirely taken out of the picture, but for me, the focus is a lot more on taking these hypotheses and saying, okay, it looks like this hypothesis is proven right, or this hypothesis is not proven wrong, and here's the data to support it. And as you start proving more and more and more hypotheses right or wrong, you'll start getting a better understanding of your audience. And then once you have that better understanding of your audience, then you're ready to actually focus on those revenue goals and start hitting those goals, and not only hitting those goals, crushing those goals. And that's why I kind of told into that next point, kind of having higher confidence. Think about machine learning. Machine learning at first, when you just feed it some initial data, it's probably not going to be the smartest that it needs to be. It needs a lot of input for it to learn and learn and learn and become smarter and smarter. In that same way, optimization programs within test to learn need more and more data to learn. You'll learn more about your audience, you'll iterate, and what happens is you compound these learnings and you compound these iterations to give you that high chance of winning. So just like machine learning needs a lot of data, you need to run a small chunk of tests for you to learn and compound these learnings. But once you start doing that, it'll start to get really, really smart. And you'll start to find that your win rates will actually get much, much higher than not running a test to learn program. So that's why I fixate on these definitions. I think it's helpful to kind of just set the frame, so make sure we're all on the same page here. So why exactly should you test to learn? For me, it's very important that experimentation is approached in the right way when it comes to testing the right things and prioritizing the right tests. So we all hate the talk about button color tests, right? What test to learn does is it elevates your experimentation, so you're focusing more on driving business decisions rather than simply front end changes. So if you run a test to learn program, a thing like a button color test wouldn't fit into the program, at least not be prioritized super highly. Because what happens once you've learned that blue works better than red? That's basically it, right? It doesn't, you've learned that blue works better than red versus other tests, such as content gating strategy, for example. That's a great idea that should be prioritized because that'll elevate your experimentation program. It'll drive larger business decisions, and you'll learn about your audience when you're testing things like content gating strategies versus simply just testing button colors. It kind of starts and stops with that one particular test. And we also talk about elevating experimentation. Experimentation shouldn't just simply be front end. Like I mentioned before, it should be working very closely with things like support functions, marketing, sales, product teams, engineering teams, UX, UI. It's not simply a tool to change the website. Experimentation should be a pivotal role and have a seat at the table for ensuring that the business is making the right decisions moving forward, using the web as a proxy to help you make those decisions. So moving on, I kind of mentioned this before, but as you run these tests more and more, and as you learn more and more, and as you compound your learnings more and more, the chances of you hitting true test winners, so things like revenue rate, revenue driving tests, lead gen driving tests, etc., they become higher and higher because you're compounding your learnings. So that's why this test to learn is so impactful. It's not simply a fixation on insights. It's a fixation on insights and driving insights to get to the point of ultimately driving larger, bigger wins to the site while learning along the way. And learning is kind of a good toe into the next why should I test to learn? Because as you run these tests, you generate insights. As you generate these insights, it ripples into a lot of functions, like I mentioned before. But specifically, when you feed these insights into UX, it's almost like free research for the UX team for them to know, okay, I need to focus a little bit more on this, or we need to not focus on this, or it opens up more questions for them to do a little bit deeper research into. And then from there, they will feed that data back into your CRO program to help you build it even more. So it's a mutualistic relationship where you're feeding data into UX and they're feeding data into your CRO program, and it just keeps on going around and around and around like a carousel. So it not only helps you, it helps the UX team help you. It helps other functions help you. So that's why it's even more important, specifically with the UX team. And last, they're more often than not, you'll require less lift from engineering and UX and UI when it comes to running a test to learn program, and your test velocity should increase. I put an asterisk around this because there are particular tests, there are particular concepts that will break this mold. But the reason why this is on here is because when you think of running test to learn, not test to win, when you're testing to win, you're looking for more pixel perfect designs. You're looking for more versions of experiments that you believe this is the go live version, this is going to win, let's go ahead and roll this out. Versus when you're focusing a little bit more on test to learn, you're going with MVP to say, this is good enough, let's try this, let's see what happens. If it's good, we'll iterate. And then if that iteration's good, then we'll iterate on that. So as you go through this, you're focusing a little bit more on the MVP and getting this out quickly to learn as quickly as possible. And as you do that, the design likely will require be less involved. And then the engineering from that perspective will likely be less involved. I would say as you're running a test to learn program, fixate more on running tests that build and fit more into an MVP process rather than simply saying, this is the pixel perfect version of the test that will learn the most. No. Focus more on MVP, focus more on quick learnings, and then iterate from there. That's your path, that's your fastest path to glory. Okay, cool. So the next section, We'll talk very, very quickly about writing hypotheses. To be honest, I don't want to go too deeply into this topic because I think this on its own can be a 2-3 hour whole topic. So I'll touch very quickly on some key hits of ways to framing hypotheses that fit more into a test-to-learn program. So we'll talk very quickly about some very basic principles. The biggest thing for me, which isn't really even core to just generally talking about test to learn programs, you absolutely must bake data into your hypothesis generation. Want to plug one of my coworkers, Haley Carpenter. She's doing a fantastic webinar talking about generating strong hypotheses. I definitely urge you guys to go check that one out. I'll just say at a high level, definitely bake your data when it comes to generating hypotheses. The other thing I'll also say is think about behavior and how you're influencing behavior as you're thinking about these hypotheses and generating them. So as you do that, anchor the then statement based in the learning and the influence of behavior, not necessarily in winning. So I'll say, for example, if we add customer testimonials to the website, then we'll improve conversion rate. That's technically a hypothesis. That's not a particularly strong one. Instead, you could anchor the then statement a little bit more in the behavior to say, if we add customer testimonials to the site, then there will get a lot of engagement with the carousel that we are planning on adding. And as a result of that, that will increase brand trust, will reduce mental friction when it comes to the conversion path, and then will ultimately yield to an increase in conversion rate. So that's kind of a pretty root level example. But as you're thinking about these hypotheses, always think about the behavior and how you're influencing it. You can ask yourself, why? What's going to happen and why? And that's a way to kind of push your hypothesis a little bit more. You can even also ask yourself, so what, when the test wins or loses? So you could say, if we add testimonials above the fold to our product pages, then we will have conversion rate lifts. You can ask yourself, okay, well, so what? What if this test wins? Then we could say, well, this is a potential opportunity for us to leverage customer testimonials on other pages, such as the homepage, potentially, maybe even FAQs. Maybe we need to add more customer testimonials. Maybe we should do a video testimonial page. So you should ask yourself, so what, when the test wins or even when it loses, as a way to kind of think about these learning types of tests rather than simply just winning tests. All right, cool. Well, now let's jump into the kind of meat and potatoes of this presentation, setting yourself up for success within a test-to-learn program. So here's some quick tips. I'll go into deeper detail. Strong hypotheses, I won't go too deep into that one because we just talked about that one. Spend extra time considering your metrics and audiences. Prioritize your iterations and use additional tools to supplement your learnings. So let's quickly talk about metrics. I'll give you a quick overview between micro and macro, if you don't already know. Micro conversions are things like, if you're on an e-commerce site, add to cart, product page visits, click checkout button, versus macro level is physically converting. So did you purchase something? Yes or no? How much did you purchase? AOV, etc. Micro conversions, they're there to help you understand why something happened. They won't always necessarily tell you in isolation, but what you can do is corroborate a lot of metrics together to help you try and understand exactly how you're influencing behavior. So let's say you run an experiment on a product page where you add a product video above the fold. As a proxy of that, you reduce bounce rate, you increase time on site because a bunch of people are clicking on the video. Let's say you get a 20% engagement with that video click. Then you see about a 10% lift in add to cart. You see about a 5% lift in people making it to that last step. And all of these are micro conversions that I just mentioned. And then at a macro level, you see a statistically significant 2% lift in overall conversion rate. That's an example where you could see these micro conversions helping you understand kind of what's happening. Are you influencing behavior in the right way? Versus kind of maybe the opposite. Maybe you add a video above the fold and you see a plus 10% lift to bounce rate and time on site's going down, scroll depth's going down, no one's clicking on the video. These are different things that you could use to help understand based on your hypothesis, what's happening. And for that particular case, if you saw a bunch of people clicking on that video and people making it to the end of the video, then it's possible that that video is, a good thing. People like the video and they're actually watching it all the way to the end. Versus if you're adding a video and, no one's clicking on the video, maybe it's not a valuable video and people don't want to click on it. People don't like the thumbnail. People watch maybe 3 seconds of it and then they leave and they don't want to do anything with the video anymore. So this is where these micros can kind of help you guide the conversation towards, is this something that's good or bad? One caveat to that is when you compound micro wins, they tend to correlate more with macro level lifts. So I say correlate, not causate, because just because you simply got more people to click add to cart, it does not mean that you will get an increase to conversion rate. That is a very clear distinction. I'm being very careful in my language. If you simply just get more people to click add to cart, that does not mean it'll automatically yield more conversions. It's probable, depending on the types of tests you're running, and you should always check that out, and you should always make sure you're influencing the micros to get that macro level view. That's not to say you ignore the macros. That's not to say you ignore the micros. That means you should make sure that they're kind of harmonizing together. One example where that correlation is not causation is, let's say, for example, I were to run a test for a lead gen site, and the control version right above the fold, it just says, click here to get your free video demo. And if you click that button, you're taken to a form. What if I instead ran a test that I changed the headline to say, click here to get a free Tesla, right? If that was my test variation, I'd wager my micro conversions would go through the roof. The amount of people making it to a form would probably lift by like 200% or something absurd. But if that final form has no change and it just says something about filling out your form to get a video demo and mentions nothing about a free Tesla, people probably aren't going to convert there. So that's important to define, and it's important to just say correlate. You can hack that, but make sure that the macros start to paint a story, and you can use that story to help guide you towards getting those ultimate macro lifts. These micros are here to help you understand why things are happening. And that's why it's very important to define these tests, these micro conversions, before you launch the test. So based on your hypothesis, what do you believe will happen? Do you believe people will click on a video? Great. Make sure you set that up. Make sure you're tracking that. Do you believe it'll increase scroll depth? Great. Go ahead and track that. Make sure you have something set up to make sure you're tracking that. I tend to defer to overtrack rather than undertrack when possible. The only exception would be if you are running a site and your amount of overtracking means that's going to impact site speed or cause some other complications, you might want to prioritize. But I always tend to overtrack rather than undertrack whenever possible. All right, cool. So let's jump into the next part that we should consider. It's not simply just the metrics. Let's layer on some additional complexity, because why not? Let's talk about audiences. So make sure that you're actually looking at the different audiences as a layer on top of the metrics. So let's say you simply run a test on a product page, you're adding this video like we mentioned. You're influencing the behavior for everyone to say you're getting more people and clicking add to cart. Well, maybe it's worthwhile to look at, for example, how did desktop users perform versus mobile users? So that could be an interesting layer because, well, maybe more people on mobile click the video versus desktop or vice versa. You could also create a segment to say, of the people who on desktop who click the video, what was their percent of add to cart click versus on mobile of the people who click the video, what was their add to cart percent click? You could even layer on things like source, Bing versus Google, paid search versus direct traffic, logged in versus non-logged in users, current customers versus guest users. In particular, maybe you have a branded video that's on a bunch of different categories if you're a bigger e-commerce store. Is this video maybe getting more video clicks and maybe like an expensive product category versus a cheaper product category? So there's a lot of different ways you could slice and dice not only the micro and macro conversions, but also the user base of those micro and macro conversions. And that's important for you to test to learn. You're learning more about these different audiences because maybe you're learning that as you're doing more and more of these tests, you realize your paid search audience, with every test that you're doing, is getting further and further away from being a positive experience versus your organic traffic, it's doing even better. And that could be enough evidence for you to be like, well, guys, guess what? We need a totally different experience for our paid search users compared to our organic users, because the tests we're running have given us plenty of evidence to that supporting theory. So it's definitely important to consider your audiences when you're running these experiments for learning purposes. Okay, cool. So let's jump into the next topic, prioritization of iterations. This is something that's incredibly important when it comes to test to learn. And I'll run you through a quick scenario of why this is so important. So let's say in this scenario, you have a roadmap of 6 tests. As you're going through these tests, you figured out that test 2 actually generated some pretty big insights. So what would be bad is with the 6 tests that you have test 2. It's generated big insights, and then you've decided, okay, well, let's go to test 3, let's go to test 4, let's go to test 5, let's go to test 6. No, no, no. That would be bad. What would be good is the insights generated from test 2 ripple into affecting your roadmap, and you now have an updated roadmap. So it's not a static roadmap, it's dynamic based on the insights you're gathering as you run these experiments. So I've kind of just come up with like a quick example. So let's say within test 2, you run this experiment, the insights then ripple into your roadmap to say, you know what, actually test 3, we don't need anymore. Because the insights we've came have already invalidated any test that could be happening in test 3. So let's remove that from the roadmap. Then let's look at test 4. Well, actually test 4, we need to tweak because the insights we gained from test 2 have given us some evidence that we need to kind of tweak this design. So let's go back to the design team. Let's go back to UX and tweak this, and we can go complete the build on that. Test 5, actually, we're good with this one. We can leave this as is. This is kind of a newer concept that doesn't require or get any changes from this test 2. And then we have this test 6, where we actually need to make some changes like we did with test 4A. What could also happen is, as a proxy of that, you will iterate on test 2 to then push that concept to the next level. So let's say you started with test 2, which was adding a static customer testimonial above the fold to a branded page. You saw that it worked. You saw it generated a lot of interest. What do you do from there? Well, you're not going to go to test 3. What you want to do is continue to take that concept and keep on pushing it as quickly as you can. So maybe as you're going through this test, you've realized, well, actually, we have a baked carousel functionality that will take us a very small amount of time to push as the next iteration. Why don't we just take this functionality and iterate on this very quickly? So that could be your 2A while you're kind of tweaking test 4 and test 6. So you're taking that concept, you're taking it to the next level, next level, next level. Maybe that iteration, the carousel, is actually too intrusive and you're pushing that concept too far. But this could be a way for you to start thinking about the prioritization of these iterations, where if you had simply followed the static rule of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 with no modifications based on the insights gained from test 2, you would have wasted your time with test 3, potentially, probably. Test 4 would have needed some changes that you're going to have to now run test 4, but also test 4A at a later point, and the same thing for test 6. Versus, you're being smart about your dynamic roadmap, and you're prioritizing these wins quicker, and you're prioritizing these learnings even quicker. So not only you're compounding wins, you're prioritizing the compound of these wins even quicker, so you can keep on compounding even faster. Your test velocity will increase as a proxy of this. Your win rate will skyrocket as you start doing more and more and more of these tests. But this is why it's so important for you to prioritize these iterations. So again, simply following the roadmap with zero flexibility doesn't yield the results that you need when running a test to learn program. And you should really allow for these learnings to influence your roadmap and prioritize accordingly so that you can really achieve your maximum efficiency here. And then the last thing I'll quickly touch on, I mentioned it a little bit before, you should use additional tools to supplement your learnings. So like I mentioned with microconversions in corroboration help you understand behavior, but you could also use these tools like heat maps, session recording, surveys, UX research to continue to further your corroboration of data So you could start getting a clear story of how these tests are influencing your behavior and learn more about the audience as you're running these tests. So it's not just simply looking at metrics in isolation. It's using all these tools in corroboration to start really, really, really learning what's happening with your audience rather than simply just looking at a macro level view to say, did we improve conversion rate? No. Well, all right, let's move to the next test. No, it's prioritize these learnings because these learnings will help you understand what to focus on and what things to potentially avoid. Cool. All right, well, let's just jump into this last section. I wanted to give a couple examples of structuring your tests as more of test to learn rather than test to win. So let's just jump into a couple quick live examples. So let's talk about B2C first. Let's say you have an example where you have new FAQ content that you want to test on your product page, but what you are seeing is that the heat maps are in fact showing that a lot of users are not scrolling on the page, even though the page may be quite long. So what you would traditionally think of as test to win would be, well, let's just add an FAQ section to our product page and see if we improve engagement. People interact with the FAQ page, we get cart increases, and overall CVR lift. So that's kind of the test to win way. The test to learn way would be challenging that the page may be too long and instead saying, why don't we think about removing a section from this long page and seeing if we can influence behavior in a particular way. So let's say, for example, there's a bunch of sections, but you're looking at the video section and saying, this is a pretty massive drop-off point in the page. Why don't we hide the video section and then see what the impact is to the page? Is there a tangible difference? Yes or no? If there is a tangible difference, then you know that the video is impactful, or at least the presence of the video is impactful. If you're able to remove the video, then potentially it's not that impactful. And instead of making the page even longer, you could then iterate and then throw the FAQ section in the section which had the video that you've now safely removed. This is an example of a non-inferiority test that a lot of CRO people do use, where you get additional benefits from changing some stuff around on the page, other than simply fixating on, is this good enough to beat the control? So in this particular case, you've learned two things if you run out this particular test. One, and the test is not a significant change in either way. The video is not as impactful as you would think, and you now have a section you can use to put on the page instead of making the page even longer. So that's an example. Non-inferiority isn't exclusive to test to learn, but this is kind of a creative kill two birds with one stone, where you could learn more about the audience and the page, because you might see that, holy crap, this video section is buried below the fold, but when we removed it, it gets not a lot of attention. Instead of adding the FAQ section, you might want to iterate and promote the video section more prominently. Or if you see that hiding the video section doesn't really even change anything, maybe it means it's time to remove the video, or maybe it's time to change the video, or maybe you should try the FAQ section. So that's more of the learning, and there's a lot more next steps you could think of with that, rather than simply just saying, add another section to the page and see what happens. And then regarding that, there's some key metrics you're probably going to want to track. Definitely things, especially if it's a longer page, like scroll depth compared to the control, overall engagement rates like bounce rate, time on site, pages a session, etc. Mouse movement. So in the FAQ page, or I'm sorry, in the when you remove the video, are you shifting attention maybe from what would have been on that video section to maybe the panel above it, below it? Do the heat maps look basically the same? So that could be one thing to do. If you were running to differ a little bit more with like a multivariate where you do version A is just hide the video, and then version B is replace the video section with the FAQ section, then maybe you want to look at kind of the heat map section for the FAQ to see if people are interacting it a little bit more. You could do that too, and that could be a great way to learn as well. And then obviously you want to consider macro level metrics like, CVR, etc. Cool. Well, let's talk about the last example. This is a B2B example. So let's say the scenario is you want to start testing social proof on your landing pages. So you could have a test to win where simply adding social proof to the section as a carousel will improve engagement metrics. You'll see overall lead form open rates. You'll see lead submission rates because you're building more trust. Well, the test to learn would be eliminate the carousel piece. The carousel piece is something that's probably not part of your MVP. It's an iteration if this concept does work, but instead of the winning piece, which is with a carousel potentially or maybe not, you're thinking more of a proof of concept. Does social proof take you in the right direction of better engagement? Do people resonate with it? Do people click on it? Or is it just banner blindness and people are ignoring it? Also, I would say you should want to test it above the fold and make it more prominent, because if it's a long page and only 5% of people are making it, to the bottom of the page and that's where you insert it, that's not going to yield the results you're looking for if only 5% of people are looking at it. It'll take you a long time to reach stat sig. So I defer to maybe making it as prominent as you can within the design constraints and within, the landing page hierarchy as it makes sense. But as it's prominent, you'll learn quickly because you're going to get more eyeballs on it, and you'll know with more eyeballs if it's something that people are actually paying attention to and are being influenced, or is it just fodder that maybe isn't as, appealing to users as you believe it is. So there's things like engagement over this element. Are people hovering over it? Are people clicking on it? Overall engagement rates, like I mentioned before, like bounce rates, time on site, pages a session. Looking at mouse movement, and then also taking a look at kind of just lead form open rates, macro level metrics, etc. So this is an example within B2B. However, like I mentioned before, it's not simply just stopping there. If we do find that this test does win, this is where that iterative process does work. And you can take that to the next iteration, which is, all right, we found out that social proof does work. Now, let's make our social proof section even better. Let's make it a carousel. Let's add more content to the page. Let's add more testimonials to the page. Let's add some icons of the customers, etc. So you could iterate from there. But you need to know if this concept even works before you bake the optimizations into the cake, so to speak. So the baking the optimizations is, it makes sense in the middle of the page. We want to have a carousel. We need 3 testimonials. That's baking the optimizations into the cake versus simplifying it down to the concept, being a little bit more nimble and agile and quicker, and then doing more proof of concept testing to see, is this something that works? And then learning from there and iterating from there. All right, so that kind of wraps up for today. What did we learn? Testing to learn is important, clearly. I wouldn't talk about this subject if I didn't think it was critically important. Focus your experiments on generating insights above winning, because it will allow for your program to grow and influence, and you will win more in the long run. I guarantee it. The next thing is prioritize these iterations. It's not just as simple to run a test and then move on to the next one. You want to make sure that as you're learning about these concepts, you keep on pushing the concepts and pushing the concepts and taking them to the next level and the next level and next level, and keep on challenging these concepts as much as you can, because those are low-hanging fruit opportunities, and that's where your ROI is going to continue to get maximized. And you want to keep on compounding these learnings as well. And I'll leave you guys with this last note. Test to learn is a balance. So it's not simply running every single possible test as a learning test. However, what you should do is run test to learn as much as you can. But once you feel extremely confident with enough of compounded learnings, it's okay to swing for the fences and go for a winning test. However, as best as you can, structure these tests so that even if you lose, you're still learning about your audience. You're still learning something about it. The concept or something like that. But it's okay to sacrifice a little bit of the learning if you've compounded enough learnings to date to kind of really swing for the fences and try something big and bold. All right, that wraps up for me. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions. I'd love to continue the conversation anywhere else. Go ahead and find me on my email if this is something you're also interested in. And go ahead and check out some of the really awesome, badass conferences from the other experimentation folks. There's a lot of really, really cool topics, so I hope you guys will go check those out too. Thanks.